Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the session 15 of the webinar series of the UP College of Education on education resilience and learning continuity in the time of COVID-19. Allow me to share my insights today with you this morning on redefining the education research agenda. I'm Sheryl Lyn C Monterola from the UP College of Education, Science Education area. As mentioned previously in the other webinars before me, this is a product of the Task Force Education. We had a white paper earlier and a set of curated resources. This Task Force Education is composed of the different faculty members from the College of Education, and we have additional contributors coming from the different subject areas. If you still remember the guiding principles of the Education Resilience and Learning Continuity Plan advanced by the College of Education, these are the following: compassion, inclusion, and innovation. And in the white paper, we presented to you 8 key strategies. In the previous webinars, we were able to discuss and elaborate on the different strategies. And now we are on the last key strategy, and that is on creating new knowledge. So this morning, allow me to share some insights on creating new knowledge despite difficulties, despite challenges in the new normal. So just to refresh your memory about the Education Resilience and Learning Continuity Plan framework. So this is the figure. So you can see the school at the heart of the framework, the heart of the Education Resilience and Learning Continuity Plan, and with the following guiding principles of inclusion, innovation, and compassion. This morning, my sharing is guided by the following insights coming from the American Education Research Association, talking about education research during a pandemic. The following researchers, De Matthews, Knight, Reyes, Benedict, and Callahan, are proposing the following ways of continuing education research during a pandemic. And translate research. Second is to organize and provide professional development opportunities. Third is to evaluate and improve new practices. And fourth is to modify or adjust existing research. I'm going to elaborate on each of these ways of ensuring that education research continues even during a pandemic. So synthesizing and translating research. This is actually evident in the white paper that was released last May 21 by the UP College of Education. The white paper actually embodies the review of existing literature and the synthesis of which to be able to recommend some strategies that are useful for our practitioners, that are useful for teachers, administrators, and policymakers. This white paper that we produced last May 21 was actually shared with the Department of Education, the Senate Committee on Basic Education, the Congressional Committee on Basic Education, the UP system, other higher education institutions, and professional associations. In the paper, if you're able to read it by now, you're able to see some of the literatures that were actually cited as basis for recommending some strategies and sub-strategies for ensuring that learning continues despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Another form or proof of a synthesis and translation of research is the way that we are able to curate resources for remote learning. If you have visited our website on this, you will be able to see that we have organized resources for remote learning that are anchored on the different strategies that we have presented on the paper. There are certain articles and resources talking about flexible learning options, talking about blended learning, talking about self-care, talking about psychosocial support, talking about resilient leadership. So if you haven't seen this particular website, please do so. It's again a proof that we are doing a synthesis and a translation of research during this time of the pandemic, which is again aligned with ensuring that education research continues despite these challenges. A second way of ensuring that education research continues during a pandemic is to organize and provide professional development opportunities. This webinar series is again testament to that. Um, we have organized 17 webinars aligned with the white paper that we have released. The 14 previous webinars are probably you have attended them, and we have seen that how each webinar was able to elaborate on the strategies that we have cited in the white paper. And again, this is a way of us extending professional development support to practitioners who will be navigating the new normal this coming academic year. So if you want to revisit some of the previous webinars, you may want to check our YouTube channel given on this link. The third way of ensuring education research continues during a pandemic is that we try to participate in the evaluation and improvement of new practices. You've heard of the Basic Education Research Agenda, the BERA, issued by the Department of Education as early as 2016. These are the same research themes, research topics that we will be dealing on: teaching and learning, child protection, human resource development, governance, disaster risk reduction and management, inclusive education, and gender and development. However, there is a new context, a new ingredient amidst all of these research themes or research topics. We have to consider, in the light of the pandemic, there's a different way of doing things. There's a different way of teaching, different way of learning, and even different way of researching or creating new knowledge. And so, with these new changes, with this new normal, we're expecting different tools, different platforms, different modalities that will emerge, and different also models that will emerge. And all of this will require evaluation to inform our steps, whether we need to continue using them, or we need to develop new solutions for education in the coming months. I'd like to say that although we are beset by difficulties, by challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, I'd like to say that this is an opportunity for us to create new knowledge. But because with discomfort, with pain, with suffering, with torment, but if we try to link that with what you call reflection, trying to think about what's happening, trying to think through the pain, trying to look for opportunities through the pain, then we're able to arrive at a new knowledge. So discomfort plus reflection will bring about new knowledge. And this is important in the field of education. If we're able to understand our pain, our sufferings, our current challenges, and then reflect on how to overcome them, then this will provide new information that will help us navigate the new normal. Also, I'd like to add that what's happening right now is a great disruption. But if we have this great disruption and couple it with what you call insight, then surely from this disruption we'll be able to innovations will emerge or will come out of it. So here I'm emphasizing that it's okay to feel discomfort. It's okay that our activities are disrupted. If there's another way of looking at it, looking at opportunities to reflect, looking at opportunities to gain insight, and from this we gain new knowledge, and we produce innovations. So this morning is all about creating new knowledge and looking at educational innovations in trying to navigate the new normal, in trying to deal with the different changes in teaching and learning this coming academic year and the years to come. So, but where do we begin? What do we focus on as we try to create new knowledge? So I'm simplifying it into this particular education research foci. So here I'm talking about people, process, resources, and context. So if we want to talk about people, if we want to focus on our research or creating new knowledge on this particular area, on people. So we may focus on how policymakers deal with the new normal, how administrators, school leaders lead, um, as they try to navigate the new normal alongside with their stakeholders, teachers, para-teachers or learning partners, parents, researchers, and students. So just focusing on people will make our research or our field very rich. So if it's not necessary that you focus on on all of this that I have mentioned, probably your research would like to focus on just one category of people being cited here. So for example, if you would like to learning partners, teachers, or community builders, so you may want to focus on that. Now, talking about process, focus on process, look into teaching, looking into learning itself, or assessing and even evaluating, or looking at leading and even this provision of support. So that's all. There are other processes that can be cited here, but the major categories are presented, but it's still up to you how to extend it. Focus that can be used is what you call the resources, a focus on resources. So resources involve materials, resources involve tools, platforms, involve time. So time on task, for example, rethinking of the times for learning in the new normal. And of course, part of resources is technology. In the previous webinars, you've encountered low technologies and high technologies that can be useful for remote learning. And lastly, one of the education research focus that I'm citing here is context. So under context, it encompasses environment. So, right now, with the pronouncement recently that it's going to be remote learning in the next few months. So has been redefined for this academic year. So normally, it used to be face to face. It used to be students going to school. But because of this new situation for remote learning, then the learning space becomes the home becomes the learning space, and so it has been redefined. Okay. So a part of context are context is what you call circumstances. So a set of circumstances, and even background and even setting. So all of this, when we form what you call an education, the education research foci. So researchers, uh, I'm not just talking to graduate students. I'm also talking to I'm not only talking to education researchers in the higher education institutions, but also practitioners who might be doing action research academic year. So you might want to focus on the following if you want to do it focusing on people, process, resources, and context. Now, why do we want to create knowledge? What do we try to understand in the process of focusing, for example, on people, resources, context, and processes? Okay. We want to understand what you call patterns. So are we able to detect some patterns in values, beliefs, behaviors, and even language? We want to understand interaction, relationships, connections. In fact, we also want to understand the system, the framework perhaps, the model, structure, and function. And lastly, we may want to understand the reflections, for example, of those actors or those involved in the research, and even lived experiences, and also in the process trying to understand some flows and cycles. So these are some things that we want to understand as we try to focus on the four people, process, context, and resources, and looking into patterns, interactions, cause and effect, system, model, structure, and all of this. So in the next few sections of my presentation, I'm going to refer to the previous webinars. at the previous strategies that we have cited in the paper and present some possible questions that can be a source of inspiration for our research this coming academic year. So on teacher and student safety, health, and well-being, taking into consideration the research foci I've mentioned earlier and the research themes, some of the possible questions that can be interesting this academic year would be the following. How does cognitive reframing facilitate self-care? If you remember the webinar of Professor Duca Pante on cognitive reframing, so here we'd like to understand more how does cognitive reframing facilitate self-care. Now, if you want to be more granular about your idea of research for this particular question, you might want to add a focus. So let's say, are you focusing on parents? Are you focusing on students? Are you focusing on teachers? So adding that particular focus would make the a study or the research more granular, okay, and more differentiated at that. Another question can be, how does home confinement affect young children during the pandemic? Perhaps you've read existing literature on this, but this may be culture bound, and the lived experiences of our young children would provide enlightenment in terms of understanding home confinement and understanding their reaction to it. And in the process later on, if remote learning will continue and there will be no um, face-to-face schooling in the next in the coming months, then how do we ensure that despite this, let's say, negative reactions of young children to home confinement, uh, how do we ensure that learning still continues? So what are measures, what are mechanisms that can be developed to be able to protect our young children on the adverse effects of, for example, of home confinement? Another question is, what are the mental health consequences of COVID-19 on learners across age groups? Here, I'm adding another focus of introducing possible differentiation on the mental health consequences on learners across age groups. So we do not want to conclude that it's the same consequence for learners across different age groups. So it might be different, and these differences will how, for example, programs can be developed that are suitable to different age groups. Lastly, on this particular topic, what resources can support student, teacher, parent well-being during COVID-19 pandemic? So the first two webinars talk about self-care, talk about psychosocial support, um, avoiding compassion fatigue. So what resources can ensure that the following will be taken care of, being are actually nurtured despite the challenges of the pandemic? On curricular and assessment priorities, uh, the Department of Education already released the most essential learning competencies. Some of the webinars have touched on this already. So possible research questions that can be tapped for this academic year would be the following. Teachers find difficult to teach via distance learning. Um, in one of the webinars that talked about universal design for learning. So here I'm exploring this particular question. How does a UDL approach enhance students' learning in times of emergencies? Some researchers might want to be more granular about it, spelling out the learning outcomes that you want to focus on. So for example, how does a UDL approach enhance, let's say, students' critical thinking, students' problem solving skills, students' collaboration skills, students' communication skills? So as we try to be more specific about the different learning outcomes that you want to explore, then the study becomes sharper and becomes granular, and it will offer more information for researchers or practitioners working on or who are also interested on the same questions. Another question here is that what are the experiences of new distance learners in using self-instructional modules? That the recently released data from the Department of Education, citing that about 3 million learners or probably families prefer the use of modules for this coming academic year. So here it will be interesting to probe what are the experiences of new distance learners in using these self-instructional modules, and how do these experiences vary across age groups or grade levels. So here we'll be able to, if we try to explore this, we'll be able to understand how, for example, school-age children or grade school students perceive, for example, the experience of using self-instructional modules as against those students, let's say, in junior high school or in senior high school. And lastly here, how can parents effectively participate in assessments for remote learning? In the previous webinars, we've seen that there's parents or families, actually, learning partners are encouraged to be empowered for home-based learning or to participate in home-based learning. And so we expect that part of the new normal is for parents to participate in assessing student learning. So looking at evidence of learning of their kids. So here we try to pose the question, how can how can parents effectively participate in assessments for remote learning? Probably additional questions here would be what kinds of training, what kinds of support, what kinds of resources would they need to be able to carry out assessments for remote learning for home-based learning. Here, talking about flexible learning options. So here I am introducing the following questions. How can learning be effectively scaffolded for new distance learners? What forms of scaffold can be given? So what models can we explore for scaffolding in light of the new setup, remote learning for this coming academic year? In one of the webinars, it talked about low technologies. It talked about TV and radio-based instruction. So here, maybe we want to find out what knowledge and skills does TV, radio-based instruction effectively improve. We may later on, it would be interesting to note whether, for example, there are only specific sets of knowledge, sets of skills, and even dimensions or forms of knowledge that are being effectively addressed by TV or radio-based instruction. Another question here is that what platforms, tools, and pedagogies are effective for online distance learning? And then if you want to differentiate it further in grade school, junior high school, senior high school, college, university, or even in training centers, so to involve a TVET normally conducted by TESDA. And lastly, here, in one of the webinars, Teacher Dina talked about changing and transitioning, and what you call undergoing change management. And here, last time she talked about migrating to flexible learning programs. And one of the things that we want to find out for this coming academic year would be what are barriers and bottlenecks in migrating to flexible learning programs. If we're able to understand these barriers and bottlenecks, and then probably later on, we'll be able to design flexible learning programs that are actually for adoption for, let's say, practitioners in the field. Home-based learning. Earlier, I talked about learning partners. I talked about para-teachers. So here, how can para-teachers and parents be capacitated for home-based learning? What kind of training do they need? So which resources at home can support home-based learning in the different subject areas? If you remember, Teacher Lenny talked about indigenous resources. The group from SPED talked about contextualizing learning. and then teacher Hazel also talked about the different materials that can be used that are found at home that can be used for teaching, no, in the different subject areas, and they have also talked about ways of integrating different content areas and ideas. So here, which resources can support those ideas of integration and home-based learning in the different subject areas. Also, one topic that can be interesting to explore focusing on tensions and dilemmas that are experienced in home-based learning. Teacher Ched made a very rich sharing on home-based learning and how it's important to set goals and how it's important to balance activities and also juggling what you call the time on task and the accomplishment of goals set by parents and then shared and of course upon consultation with their kids. So here probably it's important to also note or it's also worth studying about the tensions and dilemmas. So other tensions and dilemmas experienced by families, for example, going through home-based learning. And then here another interesting possible topic for researchers would be this one. What is the corresponding learning from home time to conventional in-school time? Um, Normally, kids spend 6 hours in school, but if they're going to do that, do we expect them to sit, let's say, 6 hours at home doing that? Of course not. It was a very teacher Chad made a very good discussion on that. So, but probably it's a good scaling, no, scaling conventional in-school time to that of learning from home time would be to understand how this vary across age groups. Let's say for learners, for young age, for school age children, and then for older students, and then citing more evidence that can be useful for other, let's say, parents and those interested also in home-based learning. Teacher Ting, Dr. Patriarca, talked about resilient and innovative leadership. She cited the following about seeing, thinking, and leading. And so here I'm posing some possible questions related to the topics or the strategies that were presented in one of our webinars. So probably it's interesting to note or find out, does resilient leadership translate to organizational resilience? How can school administrators work with stakeholders in overcoming resilience risks? You might remember Teacher Ting talking about resilience risks, and here it's interesting if we're able to understand how administrators can work alongside stakeholders in overcoming resilience risks. Question here that can be addressed would be this: what platforms, tools, and strategies are effective in managing education emergencies? So school leaders who are setting example, for example, who are, let's say, exploring innovative solutions for managing crisis during this time of the pandemic, forms and tools and strategies that they go to as they try to do it. And so this the sharing of best platforms, tools, and strategies will be useful in informing other school leaders and administrators. Here is that what innovation framework works best in Philippine schools during a pandemic? If we're trying to advance the culture of innovation, to be able to thrive and flourish and or prosper even during even these times, these challenging times. So it's worth looking at the innovation framework that is suitable for Philippine schools during these times of emergencies. The fourth way of ensuring that education research during a pandemic is to modify or adjust existing research. Probably for some faculty members in the higher education institutions, your graduate students or advisees are having a difficult time trying to redesign their proposal, redesign their program, for example, for their research tools and so on. It's understandable because in the new normal, we have to do things differently. Uh, we used to conduct face-to-face interviews and FGDs. We used to give out hard copy of questionnaires, but those have to change in light of the new normal. So here I'm citing some of possible solutions that can be used for carrying out your research despite the new circumstances. So here I'm citing photo and video or voice elicitation. Probably you're familiar with photo and video, but there's what you call voice memo. If you might want to use that, the voice memo can be used for sending questions and also even for recording, let's say, experiences of, let's say, the researcher or the sample. So so camera, a handy camera or a smartphone will be useful for voice memos, for photos and videos. And there's also what you call if a part of your research has to do with journaling or keeping diaries, for example. So of course, there's what you call the hard hard copy, so the actual an actual diary, for example. But there's also an option for going via digital journal. So here, one example is Penzu. It's a free journaling app that can be tried. But for the other journaling apps are actually paid apps. So this one, if you're interested, this one is free, Penzu. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, it used to be conducting interviews face to face, handling or conducting FGDs face to face. But again, with the new normal, this has to change. But there are a lot of conferencing apps and messaging apps that can be explored for this. So you're familiar already with Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, even Viber, and even Messenger. So, for example, Viber, you can have several people participate in the call, and also in the same way that Messenger does it. So, you can conduct interviews and FGDs. But one thing that I'd like to caution researchers that you still have to coordinate properly. You have to, for example, inform your participants how you're going to conduct the interview, for example, or the FGD. They say that a good number for the FGD using this online mode would be about six. You know, for some other researchers would say that, but probably it's still dependent on how you are skillful in terms of keeping the discussion rolling and trying to connect or make the participants interact even in the online platform. So it's still possible to do interviews and FGDs using the tools that I have mentioned here. And then questionnaires, you're familiar already with Google Form and even Microsoft Form. If you want to explore Form Plus, it's another platform that can be used. SurveyMonkey, though, is paid. It's a paid questionnaire platform. You're also familiar with Qualtrics. That's also quite expensive, and it needs a subscription. Just want to show and to inform you that this is still very useful. In our case, we have a study dealing with about 500 sample, and the pretest was done using by administering a hard copy of the questionnaire because this involved senior high school students. But because of the current situation, we have to conduct the post test, and we were a bit scared at first because we thought that we'll have a lot of we have a high attrition in terms of the post test returns, and but we're able to surpass our expectation through using Google Form. We were able to still get about 70% of the questionnaire returned to us. So these are some of the tools that you might want to use, that researchers might want to use in light of this situation. Also, but this has been previously used by my other graduate students, establishing a closed group in Facebook, so just to ensure that the participants of the study are still protected, their privacy are kept confidential, and so on. The good thing about the closed group is that you're able to document, let's say, exchanges and discussion and discourse, which can later on be analyzed using another tool that I'm going to discuss in a little while. So I'm not sure whether you have encountered VideoAnt. It's a platform for video annotation. You can ask, for example, students and even research participants to view a video and to engage in discourse by trying to introduce some prompts in the mid, let's say, and posting those prompts together with the video, and then the participants will try to annotate it by adding, for example, some reaction or some thoughts about the part of the video that's being shown. One of my students was able to successfully use it and explore reflective thinking. This is in relation to STEM. So if you're interested to try this out, so it's video annotation using video. And as I was saying earlier, for example, you have a record of discourse, chats, for example, in forum, and even in, let's say, in your closed group. Another thing that can be used for analyzing, no, is what you call a text analytics. So here, as an example, you can use this for, let's say, sentiment analysis, discourse analysis, even for text mining. Okay, so here I'm showing an example of KH Coder. It's a free platform. So as you can see here as an example of co-occurrence of a network of words. So you can see words that are interconnected. So you can actually, using this particular platform, you can paste, let's say, exchanges, discourse, or let's say online analysis or reflections sent to you, for example, by your participants. And again, this is a useful tool for mining, for understanding sentiment, for understanding, let's say, dominant themes or dominant nodes in the discussion of your students. So these are just some of the tools that can be used in trying to modify or adjust your existing research, or if you're trying to plan research this coming academic year. Basically, my whole presentation this morning revolves around ensuring that education research continues. So I've talked about synthesizing and translating research. I have about organizing and providing professional development opportunities. I have talked about evaluating and improving new practices, and talking about research foci, talking about research themes, and some examples that are aligned with the key strategies that we have cited in the paper. And then lastly, some tools and platforms that can be used for modifying or adjusting your research. And my presentation, I'd like to just read this, one. One who knows, his horse of wisdom will reach the skies. One who knows, but doesn't know that he knows, he is fast asleep, so you should wake him up. One who doesn't know, but knows that he doesn't know, his limping mule will eventually get him home. One who doesn't know and doesn't know that he doesn't know, finally lost in his hopeless oblivion. Point here, trying to make an illustration that if you talk in these kinds of words, what you call a tragedy of a researcher. When you have your results, when you have your findings that are not clearly communicated, and then practitioners will not be able to understand how they are useful in the field. Emphasize the bottom line in a more understandable um, form. The act of acquiring knowledge or creating knowledge is as important as what we already know. So, my dear friends, as I end, I'd like to remind everyone that during the pandemic, it's still an opportunity for us to innovate. So, let us all stay curious. So, thank you, everyone. I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you. So let me just read some of the questions in our chat box from Sir Alan Manamtam. The irrelevant, it's good to come up with an action research regarding what learning modality is effective. I agree with you, Sir Alan. It's a very good time for us. There are a lot of things that we need to understand, and an action research is very much in place. So the new things that you're able to implement with the new setup, let's say even the sending of learning packages, the sending of learning modules, and how, for example, these are actually returned and answered by students. And if you, for example, ask them to reflect on their experience, then it's a good source of information, a good source of understanding how our students navigate the new normal, and this will inform how we design programs in the next few months. From Sir Bruno Benohar, um, data gathering like journaling of FGDs can still be done online or digitally unless face-to-face factors are integral to the research. I also agree. Unless, if for example, it's really important that you have to capture, let's say, gestures, facial expressions, because it's very much part of the research, then you have to really wait for the face-to-face, for example. But that will take a little, that will delay the project a little bit. Now, in case, for example, your participants don't have, but for example, you may be able to reach them via phone, then part of your responsibility as a researcher would be to spend a little bit calling them using mobile phone. So you can do the phone interview if they cannot, for example, they are not online, so do not have, for example, data to cover for that data. Mhm. Oh yeah, this is very important from Ma'am Rachel Dununa. Thank you for reminding me, ma'am, about this. Consent form can be created on Google Form. Zoom automatically generates a transcription. So here, Ma'am Rachel is sharing that she is actually using Zoom for her FGD. So congratulations, ma'am, for this. And thank you for the reminder. So yes, please don't forget the consent form. Although you're doing things online, it's still important that you get the consent of your participants. So make sure that that you send the consent form and that they return the consent form before you engage them in your research. Oh, Arma Canwell Patani, is it all right if I have only 10 respondents in my educational research? What is the minimum and maximum number of respondents? Thank you. Really depends on the research design that you have. For example, with phenomenology, if you're dealing, for example, with, let's say, ethnography and other research designs. This will really depend on it will really depend on the research, the sample will really depend on the design. Okay. From Mom Jessica Di Claveria, what are the suggested ways to actually ensure the validity of the research, since data gathering and interpretation will maximize different platform? One thing that can, one advice that I can give is that you have an agreement, sort of agreement for establish an agreement between you and the and the sample or the participants, and try to as much as possible establish there that the responses are really come from them, because you also want to communicate, you try to communicate to them that it's important that responses would be authentic, otherwise this will change the course of the research outcomes, and will be if in that when that happens, no, we will not be able to really inform programs and designs and other educational processes if in the first place some of the responses and the analysis for which we build on those responses are actually not valid. Okay. From Brian Hill Secondes Salinas, how do we know? Ayan, so it's the same thing. So how do we know the validity of the answers of our respondents? Sometimes po, if you need to have, so one is the agreement. If you really want to introduce more stringent ways of ensuring validity, there can be, the responses can be time bound, or if you want, for example, sometimes other researchers would use video um, just to really document that it's actually the respondent or the participant who is providing the actual response. So there are certain measures that can all still be explored. Okay. From Sir Elmer Brabante, among those presented, what areas of research are more economically viable for those in the remotest countrysides? Okay. Um, for example po, no, for uh, for those in the remote areas, possibly the use of indigenous resources, the use of readily available materials at home. These things can be explored and would still be interesting to understand. It's just a matter of choosing, for example, the kinds of questions that you want to focus on, because that will make a lot of difference. So, for example, even talking about the use of indigenous resources, but if you want to build a framework out of that, if you want to, let's say, link, let's say, indigenous resources to thinking skills, that can still be done. The cost will not be on the side of the participants. Later on, probably the cost will be on the side of the researcher in terms of, locating literature that will help you analyze, for example, the or platform that will help you in the analysis. But I think dealing with that, no, with readily available resources, will not entail cost on the side of your participants, and so it will be still doable in remote areas. Mm, okay. From Ma'am Abigail Soliman, what could be the best research design if I want to research about a framework for professional development for teachers for online teaching? Ma'am, I think you have to organize, for example, interviews and focus group discussions, for example. Actually, it can be still mixed method. You can still, administer some questionnaires. So I guess the more that you're able to get data, whether qualitative or quantitative, will be helpful in really developing a very good framework about professional development for teachers during for online learning. Okay. Uh, there's a comment here. Probably po, we can address this we can focus more. different steps to come up with very timely action research this academic year for new normal. Actually po, if you notice in the earlier, but I have not shown this in this webinar, if you look at the research foci earlier, so you know the people, process, context, and resources, and then you look at the different themes, for example, you can change the, you can differentiate, no, you can, or you can churn out different research questions if you try to change, let's say, one. So if you try to change, for example, the focus, let's say if you focus on parents, that will change it, that will change your research. If you want to focus on, let's say, teachers, but there are different kinds of teachers, are you talking about pre-service teachers, are you talking about in-service teachers, again, that will spell out the difference in terms of your research question. So yes, sir. We can, probably you can get in touch with me, and if we will be, if you want to have more assistance on this, I'd be happy to help. There are what you call certain things that can be done to generate some questions, and then you'll be able to play around with just certain combinations. Apo. Okay po. How do you deal with the requirements of research ethical committees before conducting research with human participants, especially with minors? Ito po, ma'am, it's very important that you secure a consent form. So even before, when we do face-to-face interviews and FGDs and all, consent form. So no matter how difficult it is, you need to make sure that consent forms are being secured. So if, for example, online consent form doesn't work, you can send it a hard copy of the consent form, and then you can do a follow up with the parents or the learning partners or the guardians, and then just make sure that lines of communication to you would be very open, so that at any time that parents, for example, or guardians would like to ask you some questions regarding your research, then you will be able to address their concerns. And it's very important that in the consent form that you say that, or you state that if they decide to, or should they decide to withdraw from the study, that there's no way that they're going to be penalized for doing so. So it's an important component of the consent form. More so now that you'll not be able to see them face to face and things will be done remotely. So the issue of trust will really have to be well established. The issue of trust will have to be addressed. So you have to really secure that trust between you, the participants, and the guardians, especially when dealing with minors. Po. So I guess I have answered all questions. I hope you learned something new from this particular sharing. This is again session 15 of the 17 webinars that we have organized for the UPSED webinar series on education resilience and learning continuity. To elaborate more on doing online ethnography, there are 2 more webinars that will be led by Dr. Clem Camposano. So please stay tuned on Friday and the following week, no, on Tuesday, and learn more about doing online ethnography. So just today I've touched a little bit of that, but it will be elaborated more by Dr. Clem Camposano. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed your time with us. Thank you.